"There's not enough space for you this year, Nora." That was it. That was the whole message. No greeting, no closing, not even a maybe next time. Just a flat sentence dropped into my inbox at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I stared at it, rereading it 3 times before setting my phone down on the kitchen counter. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the windows of my downtown apartment. It was that quiet Pacific Northwest drizzle that never quite stopped, the kind that soaks through slowly without you noticing until you're shivering. I made tea out of habit. Rooibos. No caffeine, not that I could have handled it anyway. My hands were already trembling. I shouldn't have been surprised. Last year it was too short notice. The year before that, Judith said something about wanting to keep it intimate. But this time, they didn't even try to soften it. No excuse. Just no room for me. The Delaney family retreat had been going on for decades. Always in the same town, Sunriver, Oregon. Always the second week of August. What started as a rustic long weekend at a rental cabin had grown into an elaborate multi-day affair with itinerary packets, matching t-shirts, and a bonfire night with designated roles. Even the kids had job assignments. I used to be on decorations. That was before I married Edward. Before I became Nora the outsider. I sat on the sofa holding my mug close. Edward would be home in an hour. I didn't want to fight, but I couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened. Again. By the time he walked in, shaking rain off his coat and setting his briefcase by the door, I'd replayed the message in my head a dozen times. "I got a text from your mother," I said evenly. He paused mid-step. "Oh," I showed him the screen. He sighed. Not heavily. Just enough to say, "Please don't." "Nora," he began, walking toward the fridge. "Let's not stir things up." "It's not stirring anything up. It's asking why I'm the only one who's never invited. I'm sure it's not personal." "Then what is it?" He didn't answer. Just poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter like we were talking about scheduling a car inspection. That night when he went to shower, I curled up with my laptop and opened Instagram. I didn't mean to snoop. I told myself I was just curious. But Bridget, Edward's cousin, had already started posting stories. "Sunriver countdown begins," she wrote, followed by a glittery GIF and a picture of a printed itinerary. I squinted. The names were blurry, but the number at the top stood out. Confirmed guests 86. I zoomed in, tilting my screen. I recognized everyone. The usual: Edward's siblings, their spouses, their kids. Second cousins, retired uncles. Even family friends who'd only been to the retreat once 5 years ago. 86 people, and yet, somehow there wasn't room for one more. I closed Instagram, opened my email. Searched Judith. There they were, the archive of politeness. One-line RSVP rejections. Short thank you notes. That time I tried inviting her to my art show and she replied, "We wish you the best with your endeavors." Endeavors. That's what my career was to her. I scrolled to the oldest one. 5 years ago. It began with "Dear Nora." The next one was "Hi." The one after that, just her name and a request. By last year, she had stopped signing off altogether. I leaned back in my chair. The apartment was silent save for the low hum of the refrigerator. On the bookshelf behind me, a small ceramic bowl I'd thrown in a beginner's pottery class sat quietly. I ran my finger along the rim. If they had just said they didn't want me there, I might have respected it more. But this pretending. I stood cross to the window and looked out at the misty skyline. Portland always looked soft in the rain, like a painting someone hadn't finished yet. If they won't make space for me, I closed my eyes. I'll make one they'll wish they'd been part of. I didn't mean to cry. But the cafe was warm and the oat milk latte was doing its best to comfort me. Still, the edges of my napkin curled from how tightly I held it, my pen shaking slightly as I scribbled a lopsided rectangle in the corner. That rectangle became a cabin. Then a row of cabins. A circle in the center labeled fire pit. And off to the side, the word us. Lucy leaned forward and tilted her head. "Okay," she said, "first of all, you draw like a 5th grader. Then softer. Second of all, I think this might be the most hopeful thing I've seen you do in 2 years. I exhaled through a half laugh, half sob. It's stupid. She picked up her coffee cup. If you build it, they will come. Did you just quote Field of Dreams at me? Lucy shrugged. Works better than quoting Judith. I rolled my eyes, but I let the moment sit. The rain had finally stopped outside. The big windows of the cafe overlooked the Alberta Arts District, and though everything was still damp, the late afternoon light was beginning to soften. For the first time in days, I felt something shift. Not joy exactly, more like resolve. They treat me like I married into the family wrong, I said finally. Like I didn't read the manual and now I'm malfunctioning. Lucy didn't rush to respond. She just looked at me the way only someone who's known you before the heartbreak can. So what if you built your own version, a retreat? Your retreat. Not as a reaction to theirs, but as a beginning. I stared at her. I'm serious, she added. You're not the only one who feels like this, Nora. Half the women I mentor walk around thinking they're the problem when the room was never built for them. I looked down at my napkin. I don't even know where I'd start. You just did, she said. We spent the next hour half laughing, half dreaming. What if it wasn't about proving anything? What if it was just about making space for the kind of people who never feel quite invited? We talked locations. Lucy had a friend who managed a lodge near Bend Aspen Lodge, she called it. Wood beams, big windows, hot springs nearby. I opened my laptop and found the site. The photos alone made me feel like I could breathe again. I clicked availability. The second week of August was open. The exact same weekend as the Delaney retreat. A few more clicks. The deposit wasn't cheap, but it was doable. And more than that, it was mine to decide. I bit the inside of my cheek. Lucy, reading my expression, just smiled. Let it be messy, she said. But let it be yours. I went home that evening and sat in the quiet. Edward wasn't there, he'd gone to a dinner meeting, or said he had anyway. I didn't ask. Instead, I opened my phone and went through my email. Not to reply. Just to delete. Judith had sent me over 20 messages in the last 3 years, most of them unopened. I deleted them one by one. Cold clipped subject lines: FYI color scheme for retreat. Dessert duty. Guest bathroom note. The last one I opened was from a year ago. Maybe you'd fit in more if you just adjusted a bit. I didn't delete that one. I left it. A quiet reminder. Then I opened the Aspen Lodge site. Typed in my name, my card info. Paused. I hit confirm. The screen blinked, then showed a receipt. Just like that, it was real. I pulled out a fresh notebook and started to list names that didn't make me hold my breath. People who saw me not as an extension of Edward or as a disruption to someone else's tradition, but simply as myself. My phone buzzed once. A group photo from Bridget, people posing with mugs and board games labeled "Throwback to last year's magic." I turned my phone face down. This year, the magic would be mine. I whispered it more to myself than anyone. I'll spend my summer building the space they said I didn't deserve. I didn't invite out of obligation. Not out of politeness, not because I felt I owed anyone anything, only the people who had ever seen me fully and stayed. It was quiet work. Quiet but fierce. By mid-July, my apartment didn't look like a place anyone lived in. It looked like a planning studio on the edge of creative chaos. There were maps of Central Oregon pinned to corkboard, printouts of cabin layouts, swatches of earthy fabrics taped to the wall, muted greens, golden ambers, deep slate blues. A lavender candle burned steadily in the corner. My laptop was always open, at least 20 tabs alive. Retreat inspiration boards, vendor emails, shipping confirmations for handmade soaps, customizable journals. I worked in joggers and old concert tees. Hair in a bun. Barefoot. And for the first time in months, I felt like myself. Not the Nora who had to shrink herself at dinner parties. Not the Nora who had to nod quietly through Judith's barbed pleasantries. Just Nora. Creating something that didn't ask for permission to exist. I built a site simple but elegant. Soft background music. Photos of lakes and wildflower fields. A tagline, a space to breathe, to laugh, to be seen. Underneath, glimpses of cabins with decks overlooking the trees, yoga circles at dawn, firelit gatherings with hot cider and open hearts. I sent digital invitations to 18 people, not a mass invite. Each message was personal. Rachel, the private chef who once helped me through a panic attack at a friend's party. Troy, the photographer who captured my awkward, honest wedding photos, the ones Judith never framed. Two of my old college roommates. A design mentor I hadn't spoken to in 5 years but always thought of when I felt unseen. And Heather, Edward's younger sister. She was the only Delaney who ever met me in the middle. She and I once shared a room at a wedding in Tahoe years ago. I had forgotten my makeup remover and cried over a work rejection. She didn't offer advice, just passed me a warm cloth and said, "Me too." I hesitated over her name longer than any other, but in the end I sent it. She replied 3 hours later. "This looks like what I wish our family retreat had become." I read that sentence 3 times, then closed my eyes and let myself feel it. Later that night, Edward came home and saw the sketches on the wall. He looked at them the way you look at a stranger's dream. "You're really going through with this?" I nodded, still typing. "The lodge is booked. People are RSVPing." He crossed the room slowly, almost like he wasn't sure whether to laugh or argue. "I don't think your plan is appropriate," he said finally. I didn't answer. The last time I tried to explain something that mattered to me, he'd stared at his phone the whole time. That evening, I lay on the couch with a blanket and let myself drift. Somewhere between sleep and memory, I saw Frank. Frank was Edward's uncle, Judith's late brother. He died 2 winters ago, but his laugh still echoed in the back of my mind. We'd once sat outside on the back porch at the Delaney property drinking coffee while everyone else bickered about seating charts. "You're the only real person in this whole production," he'd told me then. In my dream, he smiled and handed me a mug again. Said nothing. But I woke up feeling steadier. 2 days later, I got the alert: 14 confirmed guests. Rachel, Troy, Heather, and 11 others who weren't just coming, they were excited. It was happening. My retreat was real. It was no longer a defense mechanism. It was becoming a space for connection, reflection, and joy. Then Edward said it. Just as I was printing place cards, "My parents want to talk." I looked up. He wasn't meeting my eyes. "They saw your invite site." And just like that, the air shifted again. I heard the car doors before I saw them. 3 sharp slams cut through the pine-scented air like dropped dishes in a quiet room. I was in the middle of organizing the afternoon journaling circle. Troy was stringing up fairy lights between the pines, Rachel was plating lemon bars in the kitchen, and Heather was laughing, really laughing with someone from the yoga group. We were in flow. And then, we weren't. I walked out to the front gravel path. The sun was warm, the kind of late summer gold that softened everything it touched. Except them. A black Lexus was parked too close to the hydrangeas. Judith was the first to emerge, sunglasses pressed, white shirt, lips pursed like she was about to walk into a courtroom. Edward stepped out next. He adjusted his collar and didn't look up. And Frank trailed behind, older than I remembered him looking, but with the same narrowed eyes that once skimmed guest lists with militaristic precision. Judith took 2 steps forward. "We figured it was time," she said coolly, "to talk face to face." I didn't move. Behind me, I could hear soft laughter from the deck, the crackle of a burner warming cider, the low hum of music from someone's portable speaker. Lucy appeared beside me before I could answer. Her voice was low. "You want me to handle this?" I shook my head. Stepped forward. My heart didn't race. Not anymore. "If you're here to shame me," I said evenly, "don't step onto this deck." Judith removed her sunglasses. I'd seen that look before at wedding rehearsals, baby showers, holidays where she'd smiled through gritted teeth. But this time I wasn't the one shrinking under it. Edward cleared his throat. "I didn't know they were coming. I swear." He said it too quickly. Behind me, the sliding door opened. Troy stepped out, paused, took one look, and silently walked back in. The guests knew. The energy shifted. Judith glanced around, eyes scanning the cabins, the welcome baskets on porch steps, the sign-in chalkboard with everyone's names and words they chose for the weekend. Healing, joy, freedom, enough. This is ambitious, she said tightly. It's honest, I replied. We didn't speak again until sundown. The fire pit had just been lit. Some of the guests were toasting marshmallows. Lucy played soft jazz on the Bluetooth speaker. The light caught the side of Heather's face as she handed out blankets. And that's when Judith started. You've made quite the production, Nora. Separating yourself, turning others against the family. She said family like it was a brand. I turned toward her slowly. I didn't divide anything, Judith. You did when you made space for everyone but me. There was silence. For a moment, even the firewood stopped crackling. Heather stood very still behind her chair. Edward looked down at his shoes. Then Frank spoke. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the cabins, the open-air dining table set with hand-thrown pottery, the art station tucked beneath the trees. This, he said almost to himself, this is more Delaney than what we have. No one replied. The next morning, I went for a walk in the woods behind the lodge. Pine needles underfoot. The air cool, but not cold. I spotted her near the small clearing, Judith sitting alone on a log. No phone. No coat. Just silence. I didn't say a word. Just kept walking. Let her sit with it. The morning mist hadn't lifted yet, but I was already up brewing the first pot of coffee in the kitchen. My hands moved on instinct, scoop, press, pour, while my mind played back Frank's words from the night before. This is more Delaney than what we have. A confession disguised as an observation. And somehow it had cracked something open. By 8 a.m., Rachel was humming as she chopped strawberries. Heather offered to help set up the breakfast spread. Lucy laid out, quote, cards at each table. Today's was one of my favorites. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. But then Edward knocked on the kitchen door. He didn't step in, didn't ask for coffee. Just stood there with his hands in his pockets, and that old look like he was trying to negotiate peace without ever admitting there was a war. They want to talk, he said. I asked though I knew. Mom. Frank. Maybe me too. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. They had a chance to talk last night. And every year before that. They're trying, Nora. No, I said quietly. They're reacting. Outside, the retreat moved on without pause. Troy was gathering guests for a photo walk by the river. Someone turned on an old Motown playlist, but I stepped into the side cabin anyway. Judith was sitting at the little writing desk. Frank was by the window, arms crossed. Edward remained by the door. No one smiled. Judith began. You've built something. I didn't expect it to be so complete. I tilted my head. You mean you didn't think I could? She flinched just barely, but I caught it. Frank turned. It's not about doubting you, Nora. It's about tradition. This retreat, it's in the family DNA. What you've done here, it challenges that. I nodded slowly. Good. That silenced them for a beat. Edward cleared his throat. They think it would be good to join forces next year. Merge the two retreats. Maybe, I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out sharp. You mean now that mine worked, it's worthy of being included? Frank stepped in, trying to smooth things over. We could host at the lodge. You clearly have a vision. We could use that. No, I said. Just one word. Steady. Clear. Soft as a knife. Judith stood up. You're being cruel. I turned to her. For years I asked for space. For inclusion. For simple kindness. I brought pies, gifts, patience. You brought critique and silence. And now that this place has meaning, now it's valuable. Judith's mouth moved, but no words came. I let the silence hang. Then I stepped out of the cabin, shutting the door behind me. That afternoon, I stood at the lodge's open-air deck and watched Heather lead a clay workshop. She'd rolled up her sleeves laughing as she helped a young designer fix a misshapen vase. Rachel handed me a plate grilled peach toast with honey. Judith left, she said gently. Edward's packing up. I took a bite. The peach was warm from the sun. That evening we lit the fire pit again. No shouting, no cold glares. Just soft conversations, clinking mugs, the kind of laughter that lingers in the air like music. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing something. I wasn't on the outside. I had built the inside. The flame flickered in the center of our circle, warming not just our hands but something deeper. Something that hadn't burned out. Me. And when Lucy clinked her cup against mine and whispered, "You didn't just survive this. You rewrote it," I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I knew. Tomorrow we'd wake up and do it again on our terms. The day after everyone left, I walked the lodge alone. Barefoot, mug in hand. The only sound was the soft creak of floorboards and the whisper of rain beginning again on the roof. Sunlight filtered dimly through the pine trees. The scent of wood smoke lingered near the hearth. Outside, the fire pit held nothing but cold ash and one forgotten marshmallow skewer slightly bent. I wandered room to room, slowly, quietly. A chalk handprint still clung to the deck railing left over from the kids' art station on Saturday. Someone had left a quote card under their pillow, "You are already enough." In the gathering hall, a journal lay open on the long table. I paused, then read the words scrawled in soft pencil. I felt seen here. That one sentence, 5 words, took the breath out of me. I stood there for a long time, the mug cooling in my hand. This space, it had held people. Their fears, their stories, their laughter. And somehow in the process, it had also held me. On my way back to the main lodge, I saw it. A small envelope slipped under the front door, cream-colored. No name. Inside, Judith's handwriting, tight. Formal. As if she'd wrestled with every letter. You were never wrong. Just inconvenient to tradition. We don't do well with inconvenient things. But maybe we should have tried. No apology. But no venom either. Just a flicker of what might have been if someone years ago had made space. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter. But because I didn't need it anymore. My phone buzzed. Heather. Heather. We'll talk more soon. I'm rethinking everything. I stared at that sentence. Reread it, then put the phone down gently like it was something breakable. 10 minutes later, Rachel pulled up in her red Subaru. She looked sheepish, holding a cheese board under one arm. You forgot this, she said. Then smiled. But really? We're doing this again next year, right? I nodded. Yes, we are. She gave me a one-armed hug and drove off, windows down, music playing low. I walked to the front of the lodge past the carved wooden sign. My fingertips traced the grooves. The Aspen Lodge. This place had been a refuge. But now, it was something more. Lucy called just as I was locking up. I didn't want to bother you, she said. You're not, I replied. There was a long pause. Then just 5 words. Congratulations. You stopped waiting. And that's when it hit me. She was right. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for inclusion. Not for permission. Not for someone else's version of belonging. I walked over to the stone ledge near the entrance and placed a small hand-painted rock at its base. A lavender spiral on top. And underneath it, in gold ink. The space we built for ourselves will always be big enough. As I turned to leave, the wind picked up. The rain returned, not heavy, just gentle. Like the air itself was clearing its throat, ready to start again. And as the lodge disappeared behind me, I heard my own voice, not aloud but steady like narration stitched through memory. Sometimes you don't need revenge. You just need the courage to build a place they'll never be invited to again.